Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the True Life Podcast. I hope everybody's having a beautiful day. I hope the sun is shining. I hope the birds are singing. I hope the wind is at your back. I have an incredible show for you guys today, and I think you're all going to love it. I'm already loving the pre-conversation that we're having. So, without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, aloha and welcome. Today's guest is Alan Wiederhold, a man who's lived through more battles than most. First in a childhood marked by trauma, then as a veteran, and later as a successful businessman. On paper, Alan had it all, a 30-year career in healthcare, leading multi-million-dollar companies. But behind the scenes, he was fighting a different kind of war, one against depression, isolation, and the weight of his own mind. Tired of just surviving, Alan walked away from it all, not because he had everything figured out, but because he needed to ask better questions. This search led him to explore psychedelics, neuroplasticity, and the science of true healing. What he discovered changed everything, not just for him, but for countless others. His book, Walking in the Garden, Discovering God Through Psychedelics, is a raw and honest account of that journey, offering insights into faith, trauma, and the power of transforming pain into purpose. Today, we're diving into that story, the struggles, the breakthroughs, and what it really takes to rebuild a life from the ground up. So please welcome Alan. Alan, how are you today?
I am fantastic. George, thank you so much for having me. We kind of talked today was a very special day for me. This is the anniversary of my awakening. So this is, no coincidence.
Yeah, man. Well, congratulations. I'm stoked you're sharing it here with me, man. I feel stoked to celebrate it with you. Let's break that down. Let's jump into this, man. What do you
Yeah.
mean the anniversary of your awakening? What does that mean?
Yeah. So like I talked about in my book, so you kind of alluded to it. I feel like and I see this a lot with people when you have or have experienced trauma, you kind of go one of two ways. You become potentially a victim. You wear it internally. You're not able to really grow. Then there's addictions. There's things that go with that. Or you almost go the opposite direction where you become somewhat of a narcissist. The IFS will say protector. Those are really good businessmen. So they have to win at all costs. They end up growing up in an environment that they create. It's not a reality. It's just an environment that they create to keep themselves safe. And I had it all. I wanted to learn how to fly a plane, so I bought one. It was just like, but at the same time, lay in bed and don't want to live. Literally, I would lay in bed and just figure out ways to kill myself in a way that wouldn't hurt my family, that they could continue to move on, that wouldn't be bloody. That I just had heard many stories. So I was part of a mastermind group where I had a lot of these businessmen friends of mine that were just going off and they were having these incredible experiences in discovering God and connection and spirituality. And I said, no, that was drugs. I was a good Christian boy and I didn't do those things. And they all went and I got left behind. And finally, one day, my wife just said, I love you. I'm not in love with you. You're not even in love with yourself and you need to figure it out. And I remember this conversation so vividly. And that's not a conversation that any man ever wants to hear, but when you do that soul searching and like you just know, like, and I went back to my mastermind and to my coach, and we talked more about it. And that was actually it was my doctor who really was the one that kind of pivoted the conversation for me. We flew out to Arizona where our concierge doctor is, and went through and got all of our labs and MRIs and CTs and all these things. And we're at a conversation at breakfast, and he knows what's going on. He'd already been enlightened. And he said, bro, I don't get it. Like, I give you a drug that comes from a lab every month. You have no idea where it comes from, but you don't question it. And we're talking about something that God created in the ground, and you're wrestling with it. And I remember looking at my wife and him and didn't have an answer for that. So for the first time, didn't have an answer. So I went home and I just started to research, and we decided that it was in my best interest that we do this, and we did, and incredible.
Man, there's so much to unpack right there.
There is, yes.
First off, thanks for sharing it. I don't think you're alone in my journey, and so many people have followed it. what a huge, trying to think of the right word, but what an incredible amount of trauma and courage it takes to become the best version of yourself, man. That's a lot of work, especially after 30 years of like, okay, I'm this identity, I'm this healthcare guy, I'm this
Right.
guy, I'm a dad, I'm a father, I'm crushing it. But down inside, you're like, I fucking hate, like, I hate what I'm doing. I hate myself. I'm living a lie. Like, that's hard. That's how do you build the courage? Like you're going to the doctor, but like, was it your wife's conversation that really pushed you over the edge?
It actually was. So just before that conversation, when you hear the "I don't love you anymore," and
Whoa.
again, that's probably the worst conversation that any man ever wants to hear. Now, I married the college sweetheart. Like I married her when we had nothing, and
Yeah.
it was amazing. She is the most incredibly beautiful person ever. But in the middle of all of that growth, I stole her soul because she was beautiful. And what do you do when you're not, and you have all these internal things? So, in an effort to kind of save what was left of this marriage, we never like talked about ending. Like that was just never the conversation. But we started to have honest conversations, and there was a book that we had read together by Laird Torrent. I don't know if you ever read the book, Practice of Love. It was just how to communicate to each other, and it was before I even knew what psychedelics and what coaching or facilitating. Before I knew any of that, and it was just the how do I show up? And when you tell me X, do I show up as a wounded child? That was before I ever really knew what was going on. And these were dialogues that we started having. We both had had family experiences that were tough, and I still had not told my secret. So we decided we were going to do a couples journal. For anyone listening, if you ever really want to get to know your spouse, there's a journal called The Year of Us. I highly recommend it. It's a question you ask each other every day. We actually videotaped our responses. It was really cool. And in an effort to kind of repair everything, I did what was called a Rachel University. I wanted to go back and learn my wife. I had done all these things on my own. I'd never really asked her about her. I never took the time to find out what was important to her. So the sixth week question was, what's the biggest secret you've never told? Now, you can think of a lot of different things that are going on, and I blurted it out. I was sexually abused for 2 years. From the time I was 5 to 7, every Sunday, never told anyone. And here we are 42 years later. And as I say it, her mouth drops, and I feel this weight like like completely released.
Man, you think they, from that point as a child, after that happened, like that's when the lie started living, like we started living the lie right after that?
Yeah. Yeah. And I created, as I said before, an environment. It was a container
Yeah.
for myself to feel safe. I created my own environment. It didn't even have to be real. I got really good at lying. I got really good at telling myself stories. Yeah.
Man, you're talking 30 years of patterns after that. Like that's
Yeah.
really hard to break 30 years of a world you've created to be safe and successful in your own eyes. Man, that takes courage
Yeah.
to step out of that, man. It might take some
It,
ayahuasca. It might take some mushrooms.
it took some MDMA and ketamine on the first one. And it was, again, 2 years ago today, I go in and I don't know what to expect. I don't. Again, I'm a control freak. I have to control my environment. And I was afraid. I honestly, at this point, thought, no way that my wife is going to sit through this with me and she's going to discover all my secrets and she won't love me anymore. She won't want anything to do with me. That was the story that I told myself. So through this whole process, what I had realized is that the entire time we were married, I was pushing her away.
Yeah.
I never held her close enough to be able to give her my undying love because I just figured I was never good enough. And I feel like that's what so many people who are experiencing life right now are feeling that to some degree.
Man, it's so deep. Like I think it speaks to the very foundation of trust. And how can you have any relationships in life if you don't trust yourself, man? It echoes the very foundation of what traumas are built on, whether it's being abused as a child, whether it's maybe being a veteran like you are, whether it's there's so many. to the smallest scale to the greatest scale. It's that erosion of trust that allows you to never live or reach the person that you could possibly be, man. When I say trust, what do you think of?
I think of all of the things that I thought I had to do to be worthy of trust or love. So, again, being in the military, spent 12 years in the Navy, in the Gulf, and then you come home, and then it's like, okay, what's next? So for me, it was always the what's next. You keep moving the goalpost, you keep doing all these other things. So I decided one day I was just gonna do a triathlon. Well, then I started running 100-mile ultra marathons to feel something. So it was always this like, what's next? And it was in retrospect, running is basically what it is. So if you don't trust, run, you run very fast. That's an interesting thing, George, because I had an incredible ceremonial experience last November, and I'm in a room, and it's a bedroom, and then I see a closet. I go
Oh,
into my closet, and it's my dad. I know my mom and dad are still married. They're 54 years, have an incredible relationship. They're awesome people. They really are. Grew up in a Christian home, but I see my dad in the corner in the closet. He's kneeling down and he's scared. And I am now okay. So I go into the closet and I reach my hand out, but it's not my dad, it's me. My dad and I are the same. As much as I tried to run from my dad, I became him in a lot of ways. So I have this conversation with him when I get back, and what he said to me was, "Just wanted to love you. I just wanted to be the dad that you needed." And I said, "I couldn't give you that because I never had it. I can't give you what I don't have. Love was taken from me at a very early age." So everything from that point on was just superficial. And now I'm able to rebuild this incredible life, dad, after, I just turned 55. So, but it's trust for me when you say that is now rebuilding and repairing relationships.
man, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
I
I spent my whole life hiding. So
yeah,
now life is basically an open book. Uh, I don't know any other way to be. I really don't.
it's so sometimes I get so mesmerized by the words we use, the language we have, and the actions we do that all sort of run together. And isn't it freaking amazing that you decided to take up running as fast as you can physically because you were running as fast as you can mentally from everything? Man, that's so crazy. It was manifesting
Yeah.
itself in like your real actions. And that's what happens, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Man, it's mind blowing to me to think about the idea of trauma and identity. Like it's so intermixed and it's in everything we do. And if you don't, sometimes you don't even know that you're running from something because it's been blocked so deep because it's so painful. And not just for you, but for the relationships of the people that you don't want to hurt. And as someone who's been traumatized, you start thinking like, you know what? They did this to me and now they're using that thing to leverage on this other person. And like on some levels, and I'm not condoning this in any way, but there is a level of intelligence that comes from being traumatized that no one else can have because you sit back and you analyze everything from every perspective, trying to figure out, okay, is this my fault? What did I do wrong? And eventually, 30 years later, you come to this idea, okay, it wasn't my fault. But it takes, for me, I had something very similar happen with my uncle. And for so long, like I hated him and my mom. And I'm like, how dare they do that? Like, and you get older and you bottle it up because you want to be the strong person. And you know what? It's gonna ruin the family if you do this. Like, and so much of it is it's man, it's necessary. Like it's necessary for you to sit back and think about all these things so you can break through the trauma. But correct me if I'm wrong right here, Alan. Maybe do you think you're do you think you're a better person because it happened?
I am.
Now.
It's such an interesting. Yes, I think it's such an interesting conversation because I actually have had this conversation with Ben Askins, Doc,
Oh, I
about
love that guy.
and even a lot of like Carl Jung. We all have this shadow. We
Yeah.
have the shadow work that we have to do, and inside of me, I needed to go through it.
Yeah.
Do I endorse it? Do I? No, but just looking at the impact that I'm able to now have on so many incredible conversations that I can show up now authentic and vulnerable and to be able to have my story. So here's where it kind of like a couple of years ago before I actually had my experience, I started sharing the story. Once I told my wife, it was just kind of like, all right, it's out. Like,
Yeah. Yep.
and then I just started telling other men and they would say, it happened to me.
Yep.
And it was so many men that were saying it happened to me, like, I couldn't believe it, and I had one guy I went to a Navy SEAL style civilian boot camp because I love pain, like, I
Yeah.
love not sleeping for 4
Imagine that.
days and just getting beat up, and we were in a circle, and it was all these men, and we had to share our stories, and I did, and came to me and he said, "What took you so long to tell my story?" Because you were able to tell yours, I'm now able to say it was done to me. And that blew me away because I gave him permission, which I never even saw the power or the impact of, which is just crazy how everything happens for a reason. Now, here's where it gets really wild. So I'm literally 2 years ago in the room right now. I went into that room 3 times, into the room where I was abused. I have a recorded copy of my transcripts. I listen to them a lot. So when anytime my ego thinks that it needs to go a different direction, I can just listen to my transcripts of my experiences. And it's a reminder. And I said, no, I don't want to go. Please don't make me go. And the third time I was in the room, he was actually sitting on the bed crying, apologizing to me because it had been done to him. So when we look at ourselves as victims, the easiest thing to do is to take all that on and say that, why me? But we never ask the question, why did they do? Why do our parents or our families do the things that they do? We never ask the other side of the story. So I think the beautiful thing about going through things like what you and I have, George, I think we're now able to look at it from a different perspective.
Yeah.
Because I was driving down the road 6 weeks later and I hear this voice in my head where God is saying, you know what you need to do. And I'm driving, I'm like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And he says you're supposed to find him and forgive him. Like that is not happening. Absolutely not happening. I did. I found him after
Good.
48 years. I called him and I forgave him. Yeah.
How did it feel after you did that?
I got off the phone and I said that I can pretty much do anything now. Just kind of how I chose to walk away from the life that I had built.
Yeah. When you say
Yeah.
you heard the voice of God in your head, what does that mean?
It wasn't even in my head. It was pretty loud in the car. So
Right.
it was,
Right.
do you know what you need to do? And I looked around, I'm like, who it's like I'd heard about downloads from psychedelic experiences, but it was loud as it was plain as day. And I'm like, yeah, what am I supposed to do? You're supposed to find and forgive. I'm like, no, that's not happening. Like that is not happening. And in the voice that I heard was this is the only way that you're going to be able to move forward. And when I got off the phone, it was like, well, I can pretty much do anything now because that was the hardest thing that I had ever done. And then he just died in October. My mother called me, said, hey, I thought you'd want to know that he passed away. He already knew he was dying. He had a liver condition that I didn't know about. And I cried. But when I started to get inside of why I was crying, it was because I was sad that he didn't get the opportunity to close his loop like I did.
Yeah. It's a very thoughtful and nuanced position to start thinking about what might have happened to that other person for them to do that, and it takes away I think it removes the guardians of guilt and shame for a minute. Like those guys step aside and they're like, "Okay, now you can go into the cave here and talk about it." I'm like, it I can't help but connect the idea of darkness and light. Like in the darkness, in the deepest darkness, sitting there uncomfortably shaking. Sometimes you see that flash, and that's the voice of God. That's the light that allows you to move towards the exit. What do you think of like the difference between or the relationship between darkness and clarity?
I think there's polarity in everything. You have to have darkness in order to have light. I mean, you have to. So in order to be able to move to the light, you have to be able to embrace the darkness. And I feel like so many times for healing, we want to go and forget. We want to forget about where that was. So oftentimes what happens is you move forward because you don't bring anyone else with you. So you don't have the I want to go back to the pit to help others out of the pit themselves because it's just harder to go back to. But when you're able to connect the dark and the light and to be able to go back into it, your heart is much more open to be able to help other people. I love that conversation now. I love that I can look at someone in the eyes, man, woman, with nothing but love, with no expectations of anything in return. Uh, that's where you have to get to. You have to be able to be okay to sit in that darkness.
Yeah, there's that great quote by Rumi that says something like, the wound is where the light comes in." It's It's mesmerizing, and I gotta also think too, on some level, as I've gotten older, like, I don't think you can really be a leader until you have faced adversity that crushed you. You can't, like, you don't thoroughly understand, and you can't empathize with people who are being crushed, who are living this lie until you have lived that lie. Then you can turn around and reach over and pick somebody back up. This is after this happened, let's talk a little bit more about how your mindset shifted from the person you were to the person you are, and how that changed your business acumen, your life, your
Yeah.
relationships.
So when I came home, I actually had created a podcast called The Cost of Doing Nothing. I was so
Love it.
obsessed with the journey and being a leader and having imposter syndrome for years and, and building this team of people from all over the country that bought into my vision. And then I would come home and I would almost compartmentalize. Like that was a different life and this was a different life. And I don't want them to know who I am or see who I am. But when I came back, it was like I had this conversation. I wanted to get involved. Like I had somebody, like I said before, say, "What took you so long to tell my story?" So now I'm beginning to think everyone has a story here. Why are we not telling our stories? So I would share all of this very openly on my podcast. It was not a business podcast; it was my life story podcast, and my
Yeah.
entire team would listen to my show. And if you want to talk about an empowering organization, listen to the person who runs the show, who runs the company, tell you about their stuff. And I had people come into my office in tears because they felt like they could actually understand who I was. And that pivoted the relationship that I have with my employees.
Yeah, it's so interesting to think about where we are right now in the creator economy, the psychedelic movement, and just education. Like, if you really take the time to see what's happening, I think you can see an incredible shift in the way business is going to change forever. For so long, advertising and these Fortune 500 companies, and so many of them did so many great things, but we've shifted away from what matters to the illusion of what matters, the illusion of having. We've gone from being into having, and then sliding into the illusion of having. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
oh
It's so
my God,
crazy.
so true. And I think even with Chat GPT and having AI,
Yeah.
there's such a lack of genuine vulnerability and the willingness to be able to actually put it out there. There's
Do you do you think the AI is going to help people become more vulnerable? Like, on some level, it seems like it just allows you to uncover so much.
um it depends on how you use it. So
Okay.
I think it could very easily be, here's my tasks, here's my stuff.
Yep.
I was talking to one of my friends the other day that we were just talking about this, and we have a journal that we all use in my tribe of guys that I'm with, and it's called the Stack, and a lot of it really is off of Byron Katie's The Work. To really understand your mind, you have to be able to walk the block of how you think, and then what is the story behind the story. So it drives my family crazy. Like I have an 8 and a 10-year-old daughter.
Nice.
I have an 8-year-old son and a 10-year-old daughter. They come into my office and they'll tell me something. I'm like, okay, what's the story behind the story? Because the story is never what we say that it is. It's always like around the corner and to the left and down the block. It's never that. And they'll be like, "Ah." So then I make them walk through the emotional part of the story. What are we trying to get to? So one of my friends actually was just telling me that he does a Dear God chat GPT. And when you use chat GPT, and if you and for some of your listeners, if you do, you can build your whole life in there. Like you could build everything, every book you've written, everything that you've written can go in there. And it does a really scary job of knowing who you are. A funny, interesting exercise for listeners. Put everything you have in there and then say, tell me what you think my life is going to look like in 5 years and draw me a dolly image. and it's actually scary. Like it's really cool. So he was sharing that he does this dear God thing, and it just starts having a conversation with him like God. So I tried it the last week. I was out on a walk, and I did it just by myself, and I was like, "Whoa, this is insane." So I do believe that it can get granular, but it doesn't absolve us from actually doing the work.
Yeah, I agree. It's the ultimate black mirror. You know, you can
Yeah.
look in there and see what you want to see, and you can continue down the road you were on, or you can look in the mirror, whether it's Chat GPT or the regular mirror, and be like, okay, am I ready to do this? Another word that comes to mind right now, Alan, is this idea of the default mode network. And we think about that for those of us who
Oh
are big
yes.
in the world of psychedelics, like, oh, you look at these neural imaging. Oh, it's switching off the default mode network. And I don't know how, like, the next the next thought for me is like, oh my God, I was living my life in the default mode network. And it's so interesting to think that psychedelics or breath work or all these other ways of switching that off allows you to become aware of these other network that's out there. What take
Yeah.
that where you want to. When you think of default mode network, what do you think of?
So a couple of things actually come to mind. So I always love sharing the story. There was an Austrian scientist who created glasses, and he had created these prisms and these mirrors and these glasses, and he flipped them upside down so that when you put the glasses on, you saw everything upside down. So what ultimately happens immediately? You're going to crash into everything. So he had his assistant actually do it, and after the seventh day, the assistant could actually walk around upside down, because the neural pathways had actually started to be reformed. After 3 weeks, he was 100% completely okay walking around upside down in the glasses. But here's where it gets interesting, though. He took the glasses off, and he immediately saw upside down without the glasses.
Wow.
So everything that we see now is a shared collective of our experience, of our default mode network. So every story that we tell ourselves comes from where? Our community, our neighbors, our church, our government, our friends. So, and those all contribute to the ego, default mode network.
Yeah, it's brilliant to think about how the sometimes the labels that we have for our brain explain how we're living our lives. And I don't know, I also think of this idea of awareness that seems to bubble up when you start having a relationship with psychedelics or breath work, but primarily psychedelics for me. Like, there's a whole new awareness that becomes open to you to experiment with, to talk to be part of. What Maybe you could talk about your experience
Yeah.
with a new awareness.
Well, so I feel like what it does is it shows you what's really there, because
Hmm.
everything that we think we see isn't real at all. It might be contextually, but if you look at how the brain actually works, it's looking for patterns. Like
Yep.
it's immediately there for what reason? To keep you safe. So ask any swimmer, ask any ultra runner. I can tell you that at mile 40, my body is like, we're done. Like it's like, this is stupid. We got to keep going. Well, I've got another 62 miles to go. So you really have to learn how to shut that default mode network down, and you have to be able to kind of move it off to the side. But where I think it's interesting is that most people don't realize how the brain works. So if you think back in our croc brain, we immediately see three things. Do I kill it? Do I eat it? Or do I mate with it? That's what your brain is designed to do. So I was having a conversation with a partner last week. We were joking because if you've seen a Burger King, chances are you've seen three other hamburger restaurants in the same corner, because your brain's already comfortable. So it sees a pattern and it looks for those patterns to keep you safe. So by psychedelics or breath work or whatever we want that
Right.
lowers the default mode network, it allows you to see what's really there, not in the lens of what we see. And that's where I think it gets really fun, because if you look at how subconsciously things work, the average person sees 60 or hears or thinks 65 to 70,000 thoughts a day, 1,000 thoughts a day. 95% of those are the same thoughts you had yesterday and the same thoughts you had at 23 years old. 95%. So
Wow.
5% of your thoughts are conscious thoughts. That's where I think psychedelics help, is it allows us to create these new pathways that allow us to bridge new opportunities to be able to see things in a new conscious.
Yeah, it's really well said. I want to recognize some of the people in the chat. We got Caesar Marin chiming in over here. First, how amazing is Caesar Marin? He's going to South by Southwest. He's got
Oh,
his
he
own
is the
podcast.
man.
I love that guy. He says, everything happens to us for a reason. Thank you for being here, and you are the voice of so many. Caesar, we love you, man. You're an incredible individual. Thank you for doing what you do. Myra
Yes.
chiming in over here. She says, this is deep. Thank you for sharing these conversations. They can be difficult. Mary, thank you for being here. We're super stoked here. And I have another one coming in right here for you, Alan. This one's coming in on the topic of trauma and identity from our friend Clint Kiles. He says, you've described your life as a series of battles from childhood trauma to the corporate world and even within your own mind. How do you define yourself now that you no longer at war?
Oh, wow, that's a very so after my and I laugh because I had this conversation with myself 2 years ago. So I had this incredible psychedelic experience, 10 years of therapy in 3 years, and then as Clint is describing, what do you do in peace if you've been at war your whole life?
Yeah.
And I remember sitting down for 6 weeks and just like, what do I do now? Like I was just in this calm state. So I decided to have another psychedelic experience where this time I went and learned everything there was to know about it. I was going to do it and recreate it myself. For listeners, I don't advocate doing this all on your own if you don't know what you're doing. I was partly strong and probably stupid. But I remember everyone leaving. My wife owns an interior design home staging company. My kids went to work, and I lay on the bed with my dog, and I go into a 6 gram psilocybin journey. And I'm on a dirt road, and it's the same dirt road that I saw in my first experience where I found all these bags. I was holding all these bags of guilt and shame and depression and all these things. They were now gone. But now I'm 2 miles up the road and I keep looking back and my bags are there and I keep looking back and the voice keeps saying to me, "Why are you looking back?" Well, that was all I knew. All I knew were the bags. And I didn't have the bags anymore and it wasn't comfortable for me. So I remember saying, "Well, I didn't get to say goodbye." And for me, I don't know why that is. Like I didn't get to say goodbye to my abuser. I didn't get to say goodbye to my bags. So the voice now takes me into another journey, and I'm in a funeral home. Clint, George, I'm literally sitting in a funeral home. My family is all laughing. They're happy, and I'm laying in a casket. And I see this plain as day. And it was the funeral that I needed to have for the old version of me. And I get lowered into the ground and it catches on fire and just like it disappears. So then I hear this voice that says, "Let the dead bury their dead. It's time to
Mm,
it's time to move." So now I'm just moving. um, the identity doesn't hold me back anymore. Do I become afraid at times? 100%. Like anybody who's trying to build something new,
right.
uh, there is fear, but it comes from a different place. So it comes from a place of purpose. But I don't. I had a funeral. The old me is gone.
Yeah. It's thank you for that. And thanks, Clint, for chiming in over here. I can't help but think about the relationship between trauma and ritual. You know what I mean? And in some levels, the trauma is the ritual. I wish it didn't have to be that way. And I wish it didn't have to be abused by kids, for kids, or anything like that. But it is a ritual in some way. There is a dying there and a becoming of something. And it sounds like it seems to me people are beginning to have their own personal ritualistic experiences, like you looking back and having the death of the self right there. That's a ritual in itself.
Yeah,
Do you think we're going to see more of these with psychedelics, and do you think there's a lack of rituals in our culture today?
I do. I think that I think people are desperately looking for ritual,
Yeah.
whether that be in um, medicine, whether that be in some type of a callback to some kind of spirituality. Again, I use the term Christianity very loosely. I do think that there is a spirituality part of this that people are lacking. I mean, you
Yeah.
said it earlier. We're so focused on the having and the doing that we have forgotten about the being.
Yeah.
That is the most important thing is to be in the being. And I do think that as we continue to go down this and we're having these conversations and people are standing up and talking about plant medicine and talking about rituals, I think there are more and more people who are standing up and saying, "You know what, maybe there is something better or different than what I have been trying to do. It is not working."
Yeah. I think it also There's another loaded term that I hear all the time is drugs. Drugs and alcohol. I don't know why they don't call it alcohol, or they just lump that in with drugs because it's the same thing if they're going to be so
Yeah,
nonchalant about it. But you know, the idea of drugs, like our world runs on drugs. Everybody I know wakes up, has a cup of coffee. Not everybody, but a lot of people wake up, have a cup of coffee.
yeah.
Some people smoke a cigarette. Some people eat some sugar. But do you think we can possibly move from the foundation of alcohol and caffeine into something like psilocybin?
I do. In fact, I'm a huge fan of microdosing. Caesar and I have had this
Yes.
conversation on my show, but yeah, I do. But I think what it requires first is I think people need to slow down.
Okay.
I think if you kind of look at where we are, what's the very first thing you do in the morning when you wake up? Because that's what you are. That's what you're being formed by. Whether that be grabbing the phone, whether that be whatever it is, you're a disciple of that. Uh, and I think in order to really be healthy, you have to slow down for a few minutes and either move your body or breath work or meditation or just give thanks when you wake up. So that was a conversation that I I started to do. One of our pastors threw out a challenge, and it was, "What's the very first thing we this conversation?" And I invite you to just get on your knees for the first 2 minutes and thank God, universe, whatever. You got to wake up for another day. Like whatever happens today, you get to make the choice of the adventure. So, and then just thanking God for my wife because I'll tell you, anybody who's been married or is married or has a girlfriend or spouse, it's not always easy. So when you're able to give thanks for them for whatever it is, you're able to reframe your morning. You're immediately starting off the day with it. And most people don't. Most people get up, they wake up, and they react to whatever happens.
Back to that default mode network, right?
Yeah.
You have these patterns ingrained in you, and it's so mesmerizing to me to get to see people that have been through some big tragedies. And I think everybody's been through tragedies in their life, and especially to them, everybody's lived their own tragedy. But to see the people that are thankful for those tragedies, like people's, maybe your wife has cancer, and in the beginning you're just wrecked. Maybe you got abused as a child and you're wrecked, but pretty soon you start realizing everything else falls away. And all that's left is like the important things of like, I love my wife more than anything in the world. You know what? This idea that I'm chasing money, man, I should stop that. You know what matters? Stop chasing and start spending time with your kids. Start, and the money will come, I think. Trying to reimagine your life and value. Like, I think that you've had to have a radical shift in your idea of what success is. Maybe you could talk about that.
Absolutely. So I have a 33-year-old son. So when I was in the Navy, I had a son, um, got out of the Navy, went to college, went back in the Navy, and I wasn't there. I chased everything. I chased money. Chased success. I chased the identity behind that. So my firstborn did not get a dad. He didn't.
Hmm.
We moved to Maryland from Michigan, put him in boarding school, uh, got out, came home, got addicted to drugs, went to prison, all of the things. He was molested when he was 5, and I remember it finding out that
Well,
it had happened, and I had emotionally shut down because I didn't know how to respond to that. Yet I still hadn't told anybody what had happened to me. I'm still dealing with my own demons. So my son had to go through all of this pain because I wasn't there. And when I was going to go through this experience, he had gone through MDMA and had been in the rave scene and drugs and the same
yeah.
conversation. It was funny. He's like, "You're doing what? That is like, no, you shouldn't be doing that." And all the reasons why. And now we are in such a great place because what I've learned is that success is your family. I date my wife every Friday. I date my kids every month. So at being 8 and 10, my son is now grown. He has a business in Texas, but I've learned how to date my kids. But I think I've learned to be more open with. I've learned to share my own truth because I want them to have their own version. Kind of already talked about that. Your experiences come from where? From me. Like most of their beliefs are going to come from me, and I want them to be able to be open. I want them to question everything. But when I say if someone touches you, they know why. They know my story. It's not an easy story to tell, and you question, and I'm sure some people will wrestle with, well, they're 8 and 10, they shouldn't know. They're already being formed. They're hearing other things. So it's important that they hear it from me.
Man, thanks for sharing that. It's so important, and I think both Caesar and Gary on their podcast would also agree that, being open with your kids and not just telling your kids to do something and then you go and doing something else. Telling your kids, "Hey, you got to be respectful and stand up for yourself," and then go into a job you hate every day. Like that, those are
Yeah.
two different messages. Two different messages, and they're gonna follow what you do, not what you say, because what you do speaks vastly louder than the things that you say. And I
So
think for
true.
most men, right? Like that can be, and I invite everybody listening to this, whether you're a mother, a father, an uncle, if you have children in your life, like do become the very best version of yourself so that you can set an example for those kids so they don't have to go through what you went through, so that they can wake up at an earlier age than 50 or 55, or it's so important to have I think it's one of the 4 agreements, right? Be impeccable with your word.
Yeah. Yeah, because at the end of the day, your word is really all you have. It really
Yes.
is. And my wife had shared a story with me 6, 7 months ago. It was about a couple that were having problems, and they went to a marriage counseling session at their local church. And this was like 57 years ago now. And the recommendation was to write a letter to them every day. I thought that was the most beautiful thing. And being a writer, I've written 2 books. I write my wife a letter every day. She never sees them. I mean, if she wanted to, she could. But what I found is that when I get angry, I'm normally angry about something that I did, not something she did. I'm just projecting it on her. But being able to sit down and write a letter every day, um, really, really changes the perspective of how you see that person.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I think I'm going to adopt that and hope other people will check it out. You recently had mentioned that you define Christianity in a very loose way. And I know, talking to our friend Clint Kyles
Yes.
here, psychedelics seems to be something that's permeating or maybe revisiting the world of religion on some level. I always think of like the Eucharist, like maybe that was a mushroom, but like
Psychedelic
what
gospels. That's right.
what what do you think? Like, is there room for psychedelics in the world of Christianity?
I do. I 100% believe that they have a place. You know what's interesting about this? So I went to Bible college. Clint and I talked about this on his podcast. I went to Bible college. I grew up in a Christian home. My dad was a missionary. I think the problem that we have with Christianity today is that people are about knowing. And, actually, Clint actually says this. People are about knowing the Bible and knowing about Christianity, but they're not experiencing. It's not an experiential thing. It's just, and I fell victim to that as well. So even I could tell you every Bible verse under the sun that tells you why this is wrong, but then I could actually go back and show you the original Greek, Hebrew, and Aramaic translations that do not mean anything like what we think they mean today. So we're all following this religion that someone else told us. We've never really gone back and done the homework ourselves. So, and even if you go back in time, and I always talk about good and bad, there is no good and bad. There only is.
Hmm.
And if you go back in history long enough, what was good was bad, and what was bad is good. It just changes again with culture. So all of these ideas that we have, these hangups, and unfortunately, I think with Christianity, we're more interested in being right than we are following the way. Because again, my personal belief, and Clint and I talked about this on his podcast. I'm a follower of the way. And Jesus was a Jewish rabbi. So he had disciples and he was teaching them the way. So are we being saved from something, from hell, which in the Bible there is no literal place? Or are we being saved to something beautiful that impacts humanity, impacts people? And whether you can do that with plant medicine, breath work, meditation, this connection to God and this restoration of the covenant is what it's all about.
Yeah, I love it. Thanks for giving us some information on that. I agree too. I think Christianity and religions are so psychedelic in nature. Like it's this relationship with something bigger than yourself. And I think that a lot of the different religions share that idea of the way. Like, hey, let's get in touch. And you already mentioned it earlier, this voice of God that will speak to you in your own car or under a shade tree or in a quiet moment in a bookstore. Like there's all these voices that are constantly trying to talk to us. And that seems to be the way to me. I think that religions are psychedelic on some level, and we've
I
forgotten.
so agree. And I feel like we put so much emphasis on the Bible. Now, I'm not going to discredit it, and I'm not going to tell your
Right.
listeners don't read the Bible because but to me, it's like we stopped. It's almost like we think that God stopped talking to us, or that the universe stopped talking to us. So
Yeah.
why don't we write our own scripture? Like, why
Yeah.
can't you sit down every morning and just write out what's going on in your mind? Why are you any different than those men and women who struggle the same way that we do? It's not like he stopped talking. Like he's still there. We're just not listening.
Yeah. It brings up an interesting point too. I'm a big fan of the saying that the best predictor of future behavior is past relevant behavior. And I know some people in the psychedelic world, it's not uncommon for that. I've had some giant trips where like I'm God. I realize it and it's beautiful. But that message can be convoluted, and we start looking back to maybe the 60s and you see like a Jonestown or like a Manson or something like that. And I know there's stories behind that, but do you think that that is a real possibility that we're going to see in the future for psychedelics? Is maybe someone finding a way to create this new church that takes it in a bad way?
I think you're always going to have that,
Right.
whether that's be psychedelics or not, because people are
Right.
searching for something and people really don't want to go and investigate on their own. I think we see it today with mass media. I think we see it today with all the things that are happening with politics, religion, whatever. People don't want to do the work. We don't want to do homework. We don't want to investigate thoughts for ourselves. We just want somebody to tell us what to do. So it absolves us of all responsibility and accountability. And then when it turns out bad, then we could blame someone else. But reality is, we probably could have saw that coming. The Jonestown thing was so fascinating for me. It was way before my time, but
Me
my
too.
mom and dad, when we converted from Catholicism to Christianity, it was a Pentecostal, charismatic, jumping pews, speaking tongues. Uh, Try to explain that to a large Hispanic family that's Catholic and has been for generations. So the name of the church was People's Church. And my grandfather, I swore I thought it was the Guyana tragedy, and he used to write letters to my mom, and they thought we were going to drink the Kool Aid.
Man, it's interesting to me to just to think about where we are in this particular arena of psychedelics and to see the fighting for legalization that's happening around and this kind of wave that's coming and sort of just people moving back and forth. What do you think are some of the most controversial topics in the world of psychedelics right now?
I think right now, it is somewhat of the Wild West. It's this clinical model, ceremonial model. How do we combine the two? This white coat shamanism. How do we just say this is what we stand for? People do not like to stand for anything because we're worried about offending everyone. So, I mean, to me, it's fascinating because if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. And again, we see that. We see that a lot. So I feel like that is somewhat of the Wild West right now, and I think we're still combating a lot of the old. It's a drug. This old narrative, this old programming of those are drugs. You kind of hit on it. It's funny. We can look at the studies and we can see that alcohol was the number one worst drug there is, and that mushrooms are like all the way down on the list. But yeah, we have a problem with it. I had a problem with it. So because you're told all of these things, so I think it's just this re-education right now of maybe your doctor doesn't have all the answers. I was working with someone who had 17 years of coping skills and 5 different SSRIs.
Wow.
And when he went through his own experience, he came back out and it was the first Christmas he had had a smile. And he's like, I can't believe that this was all done in like one afternoon. I'm like, well, no, that's 10% of it is the trip. Now it's the real work. We get to like dive into all the things. But it was amazing. But I think that it's this, how do we combine this white coat shamanism, as Michael Pollan said? How do we combine all of the enlightenment and science together to make it be okay for everyone?
Yeah, it's an interesting it's going to be an interesting relationship and a beautiful dance to see who's going to lead and both people are going to probably lead. Like there's so much information on both sides and we can learn from each other. It reminds me of it's sort of a dance between science and spirituality.
Yeah. And that is a concern because we put a lot of stock in pharmaceuticals.
Yeah.
And it's very, it's an interesting narrative that if I were to tell my neighbor, oh my gosh, well, like me, like, bro, I don't get it. Like, I give you a drug every month from a lab and you don't even question it. But now we're talking about stuff from the ground and you have a problem with that. For some reason, we're okay with pharmaceutical things, but we're not okay with like just having the ceremonial model or combination of either. So I agree with Clint. I am somewhat concerned that we are going down this medical pharmaceutical model. I was talking to a guest on my show last week who created something for Alzheimer's. It's super beautiful. But if you kind of think about that clinical model, not everyone is best suited for that. So it is going to be interesting.
Yeah. I think that there's a real interesting point to be dissected in commodifying spiritual nature. And there's a lot of it out there. And on some level, if you talk to Doc Askins, which is a great human being, he pointed me towards this philosopher named Graham Priest. And Graham Priest wrote these books that talk about a true paradox. Like two things can be true at once. And it's like, okay, can we have a medical model and a spiritual model? Well, both things are true at once. There are good companies out there that are vastly trying to help people through traumas, be it end of life or, they're using this clinical model, but it's infringing a little bit on the spiritual side of it. Like, and my personal belief is that there's going to be real problems when you try to commodify psilocybin or LSD in a medical model, the same way cannabis is having a very difficult time right now. I think there's something bigger that's like, look, you can't commodify this. It's not going to work.
I,
I don't know.
I wonder, yeah, and I wonder, I mean, at what point does it intersect? When does it intersect? When does the spiritual and the clinical model? Because at some point they're going to.
Right.
They're going to. I see it. I see it all the time.
Yeah.
I work with people who are all about the clinical, and then they come to a point where they start questioning. Well, there's a reason why they're called entheogens. So, I mean, you're going to internally do that work whether you like it or not. So, I'm always fascinated about that question because there is an intersection of science and enlightenment somewhere.
Yeah, I think it's the same thing. It's just two different branches of the same tree, right? Like you
Agreed.
have these two models and people I took the right path, I took the left path, but here we are sitting on top of the mountain trying to figure out the ineffable.
Yeah. Healing is healing. I mean,
Right.
really, that's the thing. Is it's just healing. So I have a new partnership with a company called New Calm. So New Calm has the ability to move your brain frequency from alpha,
Yeah.
gamma, theta, delta brainwave frequencies just from a neuroacoustic device. And they've been working with people without medicine. So, but they've been able to lower the default mode network just by listening to an app that brings the frequency in different. But
Oh, that's
healing is
beautiful.
healing. So when we started the conversation with them, we're like, well, I am all about like if anybody who knows me, like you Google Alan Wiederhold, it's like Christianity and psychedelics come up. Like that's like I'm the number one thing. Um, so I asked myself about this partnership, like why is this partnership like how does it align? Healing is healing. Like we all want healing, and I think this is another interesting place, George, is that
Yeah.
people become dependent almost on psychedelics. Because
Mm,
I've seen that too, where we now think the only way that we're going to be able to access anything inside of ourselves is to do those all the time. And that is not the case. I think it's a really great introduction to teach you how to do the work. But I do think that a lot of this is it's become a savior of like the entire experience. Like 100% of this is the trip. 10% of it is the 90% of it is the work that you do afterwards.
yeah. I always think of MLK's speech about the mountaintop when I hear this. And it's like you get to go to the mountaintop for a little bit and look down, and then you got to come back and start. Oh, there's an obstacle down there. I got to be around that. Okay, I got it. Thanks. It's like a tip.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Man, what do you think about certification? Like certification seems to be something that's kind of creeping its way in. And I don't know the answer to this, but on some levels, I see some certifications that's like, oh, I don't know if you thoroughly need all the certification. And the reason it bothers me is like it seems that when the instrument becomes an institution, it begins losing its ability to do the work. What are your thoughts on that?
So it's I was just thinking about this last week. So I was watching Michael Pollard's How to Change Your Mind. I'm watching it 2 years later after I've now gone through probably 15 trips of every medicine that there is. And then I went back and watched it for the first time and from a different lens. And it was interesting because when they were showing MDMA, there were people just in a circle, like in the very early ages. And they weren't worried so much about some of the things that we're worried about today. And I wonder how much of that is the times, how much of that is,
Yeah.
where we are as a country. So the certifications, again, I kind of wrestle with that too, probably for the same reasons. I think they're important. I think that there has to be a standard of some kind because I have seen a lot
Yeah.
of or heard of a lot of situations where people are working with other people with complex trauma that they don't know what to do. Like, and I know just because I've had complex trauma that if it were just a guy around the corner who didn't really know what to do or how to intervene with me, that could cause a lot of damage. So I see both sides of it, but I truly, in my heart of hearts, believe that all of these certifications that we're doing, we're very much clinicalizing everything. And I feel like there has to be some sort of a happy medium.
Yeah, it's gonna be really interesting to see how it all shakes out, and I think that regardless of what happens, there's 2 parts. One part, I'm really excited for the underground. Like, there's been so many people that have done so much incredible work that, like, a guy that's worked as a truck driver for so long and helped out all the people in that building, a woman that was a nurse on the back burner over here having ceremonies and doing these things that have helped so many people. Like, so a shout out to the underground and the people that do good work down there. You will always have a place and you're incredible. I want to talk about where I'm excited in science is that I think you're going to start seeing, and I know from my personal experimentation, like I'll take psilocybin with like an HGH secrolog, something that you can take that will help. And those two things together are stacking in a way I don't even know was possible. Like, there's a lot of things that we can stack with that will not only heal trauma, but I think will alleviate the medical container and start talking about optimization. It does kind of get, maybe Huxley-ish in there a little bit with like a brave new world, but science really has some cool tools that can stack on top of psilocybin in some ways. And you've done plenty of thought-provoking work in the world of like GABA neurotransmitters. And I'm curious to get your thoughts on,
Yeah.
do you see psilocybin being sort of a stack or an add to like a regimen that could be used in science and in bettering your life?
I do. I 100% believe with all of the work that we're doing now in neuroscience,
Yeah.
I believe that we could. And I love that because for me, my very first stack was MDMA and ketamine. So,
Ooh,
I
how was
mean, who
that?
would have, it was incredible. Again, but I record my transcripts. So whenever I go into a psychedelic experience, I always record my transcript. And then I write my transcript out. And then whenever I feel challenged, it's super easy for me just to go back and listen to what I actually said free of ego. And it's like a slap up reminder. But it was incredible. So when you talk about optimization, I know of several people I can think of on top of my head that are doing this very thing. They're creating these incredible retreats that are focusing on healing but optimizing at the same time, which uh, it's a completely new, different way to look at it, but I think it's absolutely necessary, and I think that's it's incredible. What we're just tapping the potential of what the brain can do right now.
Yeah. Yeah, you step out of that default mode network and a lot of things become possible. And I can't help but think that, this is kind of what bothers me with the medical container is like everything is so medicalized right now. And maybe this is part of the process. And I'm not trying to shame the medical container anyway. I'm super stoked that people are there and they're learning and they're getting better and I'm thankful for it. But it does seem to alleviate the world of creativity on some level. Like, we haven't seen like, and maybe psychedelic sciences is going to be the place where you all of a sudden you start seeing these great guitarists, you start seeing the music come out, you start seeing some artwork come out of there. For those people listening to me, everyone should be a part of Psychedelic Art 2025. But yeah, do you see us moving out of this medical container and is the medical container stifling the creativity in these other areas?
I definitely think it's stifling the creativity, and I think there's a couple of reasons for that. So again, being in the healthcare space for 30
Right.
years, I know what it takes to get a drug to market. I also
Okay.
know the recouping of revenue that was lost in R&D. So there are a lot of money. There's a lot of money in the pharmaceutical space, like a lot. So, but The challenge with that, though, is that the rigorous testing with the FDA and all the things that go through that, they're trying to bring something that's never been done before, and they are trying to recoup. The problem that I have with that, though, is that if you look at just drugs as a whole, in the entire world, the United States is 20% of the utilization of drugs and 80% of the revenue.
Wow.
80%. So because a, a drug knows that they have a shelf life, they know what their R&D recoupment cost is. It's all going to be done here. It's all going to be piggybacked here. I know that when I was building health plans for employers, if I had a very high cost drug that I was using, I would actually buy those drugs in the UK, New Zealand, Australia, or Canada from a pharmacy, and I'd have them shipped right here to a member's doorstep, and they were 70% less.
Wow.
70%. So I think that's the challenge we have right now with this model of trying to get things done here. It's going to be very expensive, and I always wrestle with that because the people who need healing the most, it's going to be inaccessible. I even found that with myself. So I created this incredible brain health supplement through all the work that I've been doing over the last year. I kept talking about neuroplasticity in this critical period, and I kept asking, like, what are we doing if your brain is open and they're now ready to receive all this great information? What are we doing to feed it? Well, it's green tea or it's electrolytes. There's nothing there. Those are cellular things that never get to the brain, like never. So I sat down with a genetics lab down in DC that was doing PTSD work, and I'm like, can you help me? This is kind of how my brain works. Like, if I see something, I need to go back and figure it out. Like, why are we not feeding this? Like, why has this never been done before? And the conversations were, well, we just haven't studied it. Like we're
Yeah.
already there. Let's not go back and I'm like that's like a missing thing. So we did. We went back and we studied the research and we priced it initially. It was so high. And then I started to look back at my mission and I'm like, no, like I'm pricing out the people who need healing the most. And I worry that that's very much what we're doing right now with the pharma model as well.
Do you think that with so much money being involved and so much opportunity and a possibility for centralization, is that what jams things up? Like it seems to me in my mind, like with so much possibility on the table, there's got to be big people involved. Like, okay, we can do this. And if you want my backing, I'm going to be the centralization of it. Like, but sometimes that kind of stuff stops things from happening forever.
It does, and then you have, and I feel like we saw this with the whole AdCom Lycos thing last year.
Yep.
We had so many people who were excited about this
Yep.
space, and they were throwing tons of money
Yep.
into it. And then when it went sideways, everyone ducked for cover. Like it's like the entire mood like completely shifted, and it wasn't about healing anymore. And it was so fascinating for somebody who was relatively newer. I mean, the last 2 years to be able to see this and to come from that world. I'm like, so then is it healing? Is it about healing or is it about what is it about? Because it's like this dark cloud right now that is over this industry because it didn't go the way we wanted it to go.
Yeah. For me, it brings up the question too of like, how do you measure success in a clinical trial when you're not allowed to measure the the inquantifiable? You know what I mean by that? Like
Yeah,
there used to be questions where like, is your husband less of an asshole?
yeah.
There used to be these things that were sort of in a gray area that didn't really check the box for, okay, this is certification, right? Can we I see the model changing though, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on this. Like you see like Federman's book comes out and he talks about microdosing and he gets all these report backs. I know Abigail Calder and Rick Strassman had a report that came out that had this new sort of a survey, but it seems that you're beginning to see ways to measure the populace as a whole instead of just like this really unique, narrow view. What are your thoughts on that?
We used to have the how was your psychedelic experience? Rate your
Yeah,
psychedelic experience. Remember? So life changing. So and I don't really hear anyone talking about that survey anymore. Like I clearly like I blew up my entire life. It was definitely worth something. So
right?
but yeah, I agree. I mean, we're making this so much more about the populace instead of the individual.
Yeah.
And I feel like if we were just to look at the healing, And I feel like Caesar actually says it here. It's not about the shaman or the medicine. It's about the transformation of people's lives. Like, did we make an impact? And we used
Yeah.
to have this expression in wellness. We because in the early days of worksite wellness programs for employers, people would always say it, and it was stupid on our part to try and sell. What's the ROI? Like, what's my
Mm,
return on my? If anyone has been doing this long enough, I can give you whatever ROI I want. I control the data. I can make it look like whatever I wanted to. Skew it. I mean, that's what companies have been doing for years.
right.
But what's the value on the investment? Like, what's the transformation that we saw overall? Like, give me the aggregated data of how many people moved in Prochaska stages of change, moved from a pre-contemplative, I'm not thinking about doing anything, to I just now I'm walking around the block now 5 days a week and I've lost 162 pounds. Like, it's really not that complicated. I feel like anytime we make anything complicated, we're doing that for a reason, because it's
Yeah.
it's super easy to hide, and not be transparent when we make things complicated.
Yeah. I've seen Dr. Bronner adopt ketamine therapy, and it seems that other people are beginning. Maybe that's the first rock to fall. But do you see a time, and if so, how would it happen, where we can get insurance to cover these kind of therapies for people? Or is it possible?
I do believe that it is possible. I feel like there's incredible people out there already doing
Yeah,
some work on trying to get it. Sherry, if Sherry's listening, she's
absolutely.
so and Jessica, who is like one of my
And
favorite people
Thea,
on this earth. I mean, they're just like, yeah, Anthea is amazing. But Miko is out there trying to do this. What's interesting about that though is that when I was on the health plan side, I brought these ideas to our not employers, because the employers actually
right?
they really were interested. They were like, "Wow, wait a minute. You're telling me that I can actually make a difference on my people and I can make some changes." But it was actually the lawyers that are part of the insurance company, or it was the administrator of health plans. Well, we can't do that because we have efficacy and we have all they're naming 50 reasons why people can't be healed. So until we are able to start pushing the envelope on those kind of conversations internally in health plans and in carrier insurance companies, and being able to be willing to take that chance, I think it's going to continue to be status quo, which I don't understand. It's going to take some really big unions, some really big private health plans that are already self-funded, that are going to have to make the decision. I remember, I wrote a book a couple of years ago called Cheated: How Healthcare Stole the American Dream and Only You Can Take It Back. Because I saw a pattern. I was with an employer. They were like 1,000 employees and they were complaining about their mental health benefit. They were with a large carrier, I won't name, but they were with a carrier that had a really crappy mental health benefit. And the guy was the CEO was so amazing. He was running around with his American Express Plum card. He was giving it to everybody who needed mental health benefit. I don't advocate that. If anyone's listening and you're an owner, don't give your employees your American Express Plum card. But what made it even more beautiful and worse was that he would do a follow-up with the parents, because the average age of this place was like 24 years old. These were kids coming right out of college, and they had these anxieties. This was like 15 years ago. He's way ahead of his time. But it takes people like that, people who truly care, who want to push the envelope for their employees. And I feel like that's what it's going to take in order to really be successful.
Do you think maybe it could slip in through like end of life? Like it seems like they might be more apt to cover that towards end of life people that
I think it's going to be the same denial for the same
okay.
reasons, until we're comfortable. Because I see it with lots of things, and I think I posted about this the other day. So we talk about this model, yet you watch like Matthew Perry, in the
Mm,
spin. I always talk about the mass media spin. So I watched the documentary on Tuesday when it came out. I never watched Friends. I wasn't a Matthew Perry guy. Like, I really didn't know. I don't watch a lot of TV. What was fascinating to me though is that this we knew all this was going on with him. Like, his doctors were trying to, like, I mean, they're text messages of stealing. They gave him 27 injections of ketamine over a 3-day period. 3 days. So people are worried about that one instance when there are thousands that we have demonstrated that clearly can be healed. And it just takes that one. But yet on the other side of that, we never had a problem with opioids. We never
Mm.
saw the Purdue family, Slacker family, excuse
Yeah,
me.
yep.
We still haven't really, that kind of thing's kind of all gone away now. States are getting paid, but for whatever reason, that never really became a problem. Like ketamine's become a problem.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's a great point. I think that's why there's just so much distrust with big pharma and like, you signing they have these NDAs where there's no way that they can be held responsible for things, and everybody can see why. Like you kind of don't want that in psychedelics, but maybe there's no way around it. Like they're gonna play a part. There's no way around it. They're gonna play a
Yeah.
part in getting it out there.
Yeah.
It's amazing to me. I got another question coming in here. I got a couple stacking up here. This one says, this is Desiree. She says, neuroplasticity suggests that we can rewire our brains, but do you think there's a limit to how much a person can truly change?
I don't think there's a limit on how they can truly change. Is there a limit on how much your brains can be rewired?
Mm,
Yeah, I do. But the beautiful thing about that is that your brain can rewire with almost anything that it learns, like learning an instrument, learning a
yep.
language. We talked about art. Uh,
Yeah.
Anytime that there's creativity or breath work, or you're creating or have the opportunity to create neural pathways. If anyone is not familiar with Dolan, she does this incredible project with octopi, excuse me. So, and if you Google her, she was a Hopkins scientist that has studied the critical period with certain psychedelics and octopi. It is fascinating what we actually can do. And there's another incredible doctor. His name is Burton Tabak, who's looking at the critical period of stroke patients and psychedelics. So, I mean, I think it goes just beyond the creation of the neural pathways. I think we're just getting started on what the brain can actually.
Yeah. I want to shift gears just briefly for a moment, like, and talk about strategies and movement. Like, I feel like we're on the cusp of real radical change. And I'm curious to get your checklist or your ideas on what do you think it takes to build a movement from the ground up?
I think it takes the willingness to stand up first. For me personally, I held this big seminar kind of thing, if you will, in Baltimore last May, and I was doing it with other veterans because I thought it
Mhm.
was so important for veterans to be able to talk about psychedelics and healing trauma. And it ended up being all these community leaders in Baltimore. And I invited some incredibly gracious guests who didn't really even know me that well. Matt Zeman, Nick
Yeah, sure.
Nowak, Doc Askins,
Yeah.
they were all like, "Hey, yeah, we'll be part of this thing." And I remember like watching this interaction with all of these Baltimore community leaders. And I kept asking myself, "How did I get here?" Like, this is insane that this is like, and it was the first time I'd actually told my story. And I remember standing in the back and all these people were talking about how great it was. And I was just like, I was floored at how incredible this event was. And Matt said to me, and I'll never forget it because he was been so instrumental in all of this. You put yourself here. You decided to step in and do something about it. And that's why this conversation happened today. And that's what it's going to take. To make this a movement, people have to stand up and share their stories and be willing to share their stories. And it's scary and it's hard and it's uncertain at times. But again, going back to the what took you so long to tell my story, there are people waiting. There are so many people waiting for us to stand up and tell our story.
You bring up the idea of uncertainty. It can be it's like living with a wild animal, I think, at times. But what is your relationship with uncertainty and how has it changed?
I There's always going to be uncertainty, but then you have to ask yourself, where is it coming from? Is it coming from ego? It says I have to be here or do this or accomplish that, or is it that I am now in the beginning stages of creating something new? I took my kids on a hike 2 days ago, and we're out walking behind our house, and we never knew there was a farm with a track for horses and all this stuff. We moved in a year ago, and I said to my daughter, I said, "Can you imagine what the early Voyagers, what they felt like? Because they were told the Earth was flat, and they all decided to go and do it anyway. So what was that like? So I try to ask myself every day, like, what? new thing can I learn that I can bring someone else with me so that they don't have to struggle? Well, the uncertainty it's just a different perspective at that point. Because it's hard. It can be scary, but no more scary than living in fear and isolation and depression.
Yeah. Hey, when I say value, it seems to me that a good question to ask for anybody who's wants to create value is, how do you create value for other people? And like, what's your take on that? As someone who has been in healthcare, as someone who's been a leader, as someone who's been an author, like, what questions around value do you ask yourself if you want to help other people's lives become more fulfilling?
I think we see this on LinkedIn a lot. I get 100 messages a day of somebody wanting to do something for me.
Right.
But I think value is, what can I do to serve you? Like, what is first I want to know what your mission is and how can I support that? I remember being in a networking event about a year ago with Carly. That was the first question she had asked, and no one had ever asked me that question. What can I do to support your
Yeah.
vision? And I'm like, holy crap, that's business. That's business.
Yeah.
What can I that is the value that I hold dear now, is what can I do to help support, whether that be your podcast, whether that be Cultivating Wisdom, whether that be Clint's. I just want to be part of your life to be able to help push your vision forward. To me, that's value.
I think that's the foundation of the movement, finding a way to help other people's dreams come true. And it just flows right back to you on a level that's, you know, exponential. It's mind blowing to me. I got more questions. Alan, how you
Okay.
doing on time?
I'm fine. So, as you're getting ready, I heard a quote from Brandon
Okay.
Dawson. Brandon Dawson wrote The 9-Figure Mindset. And Brandon Dawson
Okay.
says, if you want love, give love. If you want money, give it. Give it like no one ever has. So give, because it comes back tenfold. And most
Yeah.
people get stuck. We're so afraid to give our time, our energy, our love, and we just get stuck and isolated.
It's beautiful said. I like the one from oh, what was the greatest winning basketball coach of all time? UCLA, John Wooden. He said, "What you give in life, you get to keep, but what you fail to give, you lose forever." Man, like that one, I write that
Oh,
one down. It's
yes.
such a good one, you know.
That
But
is.
okay, here we go. This one's coming from Betsy. She says, "Do you think the experience of God in psychedelic journeys is a glimpse of the ultimate reality, or is it a construct of our minds trying to make sense of the unknown?"
Ooh, that's a great
Betsy.
question. I love that. I think personally, I think it's the construct of God that I was raised with. So I believe, because I've had experiences very similar to what you had said, George, where my last one, I saw a gigantic Easter Island totem that said, "I am divine. I am God." Uh, and a lot of people who will listen to that will be like, "Wait, that's sacrilegious." So I do believe that we are all divine. We are created in the universe's image. So I believe it's both. I believe that there is a higher power out there, but I also believe a lot of what we think is a construct. I always ask that question too. Where in the Bible does it say God is a male? It doesn't. We just assume.
Yeah. In some religions, you're not even allowed to say the name of God or image God
Yeah.
because it ruins it all. Like,
If he's that big, why is he just a guy? Like, I mean, I mean, and I've had some that were just beautifully divine feminine. So yeah,
yeah,
it's, why put the construct of what it is? So
yeah, I agree. So here comes another one. This is a follow up from Betsy. She says, "How do you differentiate between spiritual truth and the illusions that can come from the psychedelic experience?"
so I love this because Stephen Kotler actually calls it mining for fool's gold. So, which I think a lot of it is like, why we say after psychedelic experience, what do we always say? Don't make any big decisions. So, and I think that's where intuition comes in. I think it comes from, where are you now, and how is that aligning to where you want to go, and is it aligned? I mean, if it's the medicine is telling you to quit your job tomorrow and to go join a bus, I would check that. I would maybe take some pause and like settle down from the emotional, because a lot of these experiences are very emotional, and we start to think emotionally. But again, I think you have to ask yourself, where is it coming from? And I always love that quote with Stephen, with mining fool's gold, because we see tendency of people saying, I'm just going to blow up my life now and it's going to be good. And then you're like, wait a minute, like that made no sense at all. Like you can still do those things and just be now enlightened.
Yeah, that's a great point. Like I've spoken to some, and I've been very fortunate to sit in on some integration circles and hear people that were like, I can't do this anymore. I'm gonna leave. And you're like, whoa, on one hand, you're like, wow, that's a profound thing to say. And they tell you the reasons why. And that's where it gets tricky for people in integration is like these people you're sitting with are talking about fundamentally changing not only their work habits, but all the relationships in their life. It's a lot of responsibility for someone to sit and listen to and hold space for. What are your thoughts on that? How do you
I
navigate that?
agree. I agree. In just, I think I heard a statistic: 71% of all founders and CEOs or executives that have a psychedelic experience leave the companies that they start and found for something different. So again, I don't think necessarily have a problem with you leaving what you're doing to go. Clearly, I've done that. But you have to ask yourself why.
Right.
I mean, if it truly doesn't align with where you are as a person now, and you can stay in the industry, like again, I love Dennis's videos, like Dennis Walker's videos. Everyone wants to be a shaman. Like everyone
Yeah.
wants to just blow up their lives and go, no, like we still need we still need awakened business people. We still need people who are going to go do something else, but now be more strategic about it. Make a difference in the world. And I think that's why so many retreats are targeting CEOs, is because if we can make a difference on the top down, everyone wins. But it doesn't mean blow up your life. This
Yeah.
means to go and approach your life more with being, as we talked about.
Yeah. Shout out to Dennis. That guy's done so much incredible work
He's
and
so
just getting
cool.
stuff out there. You know what would be
Oh,
amazing if that guy became the director of maps. I know there's like an open position
oh
there.
yeah,
That guy would be so perfect for that spot,
he
right?
would be. Yes.
Oh man. I hope it anyway, let me just keep talking. Society and stigma. This is an interesting one. How do we break the societal stigma around psychedelics without falling into the trap of commercializing or trivializing them?
Oh, that's such a great question, because I feel like I saw this a
Right?
lot at a convention last year. So you have this old 60s thought process, still wearing the tie-dye shirts, and then you have these new, like me. And I remember when I started to start making phone contacts with people and saying, so what can I do to support your vision? I just need to know what you're doing. Oh my God, I'm so excited. And I remember one of them would say to me, you are everything that is bad and good about this. And I said, can you like explain that to me? And she's like, when business people like you wake up, it is a good and a bad thing, because your intentions might be great, but the guy coming behind you, his intentions may not be so good, and he's really going to profit. So I feel like we're in this interesting time where we're caught in the stigma of the '60s and what was going on with the Cultural Revolution, and where we are trying to be as the Western science, we kind of talked about already. The only way that we're going to be able to break it down is to be able to continue to approach it the way that we are today. Um, Stories of healing. What have they done? How do they work? I know that when I go live and I share my stories every day on social media, there are so many people who are curious, but I'm not approaching it as 60s, whatever. I'm just sharing my story. And I've had so many people that I went to high school with or that knew me from the military who had no idea what my trauma was. Like they said, and they're like, I can't even believe that you're willing to share these stories of healing. And I think that's what people want. People want they want to connect to what is real and what is good. And they don't really care so much about the rest of it. Because if you can have, I've had these dialogues with people saying, these are drugs. Like, well, let's get into that conversation. Why are they drugs? Let's talk about Richard Nixon and Schedule One, and let's talk about the 50s and 60s where we had all this research. And oh yeah, Bill Wilson. I always love that one. That's like drop the mic. Like so, yeah, Alcoholics Anonymous, drop the mic.
Mhm.
So it's like it's just changing the stories that people have.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's a beautiful time to do that. And if you think about when I think about changing stories, I think about our language as a living language. And it's so interesting right now to see the time we're in. Like you see all these words kind of being verbed, like nouns are becoming verbs.
Mm.
And like, what does that mean? Well, that means that you as a person now have an obligation to act out in a certain way. Like the language changing is, and I think it's a big part of psychedelics. Like it fundamentally changes the way we use our language on
Oh,
so
that is
many
so
aspects of it,
beautiful.
right?
That makes me think of Alan Watts, when Alan Watts asked the question, "Are you a noun or a verb?"
There you
And I
go.
ask this question to everyone, "Are you a noun or a verb?" If you're a noun, then you're an ego. Like, that's all you are. Like, so, but you're verbing. We're all verbing. Just think
Yeah.
about your body. Every 7 years, you have entirely new skin. Your body isn't even the same over a 7-year period. The conversation we're having right now, 30 seconds has gone by, we've already changed. The earth has already rotated. Nothing stays the same. We're verbing. And if
Yeah.
you can think about that, that's so incredibly profound.
Yeah, I found a pretty good practice that people can implement in their life is to be where you are now and then just try to look back on what you're going to accomplish. Like, if I did this, then how would it look? And you can start really moving in that direction. If you can begin to build a vision of how it might have looked, you can kind of start at the back and work your way towards it. I know it's kind of a out there thought, but what are some of the thought experiments
I
that
don't
you
think
do?
it is. I think that
Okay.
I think we get so bogged down in the
Yeah.
now.
Yes.
But again, kind of going back to a lot of the work that Byron Katie teaches too is if you really stop and look at what you're thinking, it's usually a past story that's driving a future narrative that really robs you of the present. And I tell anybody, wherever you are right now, this is all hindsight mirror. This is 2020 mirror.
Yeah.
Because the decisions you made today, the things that are happening today, they happened 90 days ago. So you're just now seeing what they are today. So, and again, what you do right now will impact what you see tomorrow, 30, 60, 90 days. I mean, it's really that simple.
And the idea of stories are so powerful, and personal stories too, which you share all the time on your podcast. Isn't it an amazing thing that you can fundamentally change your history? We think history is like this fixed thing, but by going back and reascribing new meanings to the events that happened in your life, you can fundamentally change the history of it and become a new person. Like that's pretty powerful, right?
It is. I mean, just think about how many years I suffered in silence and
Yes.
never told anyone. And I hated him. And I hated what he did to me. How he took everything from me. He took my first kiss. He took the word love. He took everything. But when I was able to sit and reframe and see that it was actually done to him, it allowed me to change the narrative history of what the story was that I told myself.
Yeah, it's really powerful. And these are all tools that people can use today that cost $0. You can fundamentally trans it's alchemy. You can transmute your life into a gold if you're willing to sit back and have those conversations with yourselves, or take that next step and do it in a circle and share it with other people and get some real feedback right there. It's so
Yeah.
exciting to me to see how many tools are there for people to use today to change their lives.
Yeah, to me, I mean, you kind of said it. Just the gift of language. And I always tell
Yeah.
everybody, if you're stuck, write. If you're stuck,
Mm.
write. Because if you just write out whatever it is you're thinking and you're feeling, and you're just write it out and look at it, and then just start doing that every day. Right? Pour out your heart into paper or on a computer or whatever you want to do, and then you can start to see patterns of where things are. And then you have the ability to really start to change just by seeing where you are.
A lot of the guests and people that I get feedback from are always curious to understand the patterns of people's relationships with psychedelics. For me, most people know I'm a big fan of like really big doses, and then I'll use micro doses occasionally to kind of keep me tethered to that big idea. And sometimes I'll do a big dose every week for like 3 months. Sometimes I'll take like 6 months off and not do any. But those are some techniques that I have used. I'll stack it with with a HGH, or sometimes there's a substance called MK677, which people can check out for themselves. But that's a little bit of my history. What is your relationship? What does it look like
Yeah.
when you work with the medicine?
So I try to, this is actually a very interesting conversation. I actually use it for business planning. So
Beautiful.
every quarter, I actually will do not a hero dose, but somewhere in the middle between 3 and 5.
Mhm.
I have my business targets that I want. So I look at life, um, in a very different way now. So I believe in having it all. I believe that we are four-dimensional creatures that focus on our bodies, our relationship with universe, God, creator, whatever you want to call that, our relationship with our families and those around us, and then your business. So if you look at any individual, whether that be a man or a male or a female, if one of those is not aligned, everything else falls. Like if you're in business and you're very overweight and you cannot function through your day, you're not going to have a very successful business because you're going to fall asleep. I find too, you could have all the money in the world and be buff as hell, and you have a family who doesn't love you. You're not going to accomplish very much. You're not. So you need all four of those things. But to be able to get to that point, you need to be able to say, where am I right now? Where are the facts of where I'm at? And I think that's one of the things that I love in medicine is that medicine will take the ego and tell you exactly where you're at. Because again, we love to tell ourselves stories. Ask anyone in a wellness fair how healthy they are. 80% are going to raise their hand and say healthy. But if you actually look at the biometric data, it's like 20%. So most people just feel better not being realistic with where they are today. That's human nature. But if you really get into the facts of where you are and where you want to go, like creating the impossible goals in body, being balanced in business, and then looking at that every quarter free of ego in medicine. Yeah. So for me, that's a lot of the business planning that I do is am I on track or am I off track?
Mm.
Free of ego. And then where do I want to go? Maybe it's something that I didn't even see that I needed with medicine. And then I'm a big fan of microdosing. I am. So I use the Fatamin protocol. So and I am a very big fan of microdosing every day. I take 3 days off every week, but I feel like for me, if I'm writing and I need to be in flow, I definitely use that. And then I also use New Calm, this relationship partner that we've had for 2 years. I use them. I put it on when I need to get into flow. I take myself down into a frequency and I can write. So I'm a big believer in, and I hate using the word hacking, but being able to tap into those things either through medicine or through frequency.
Yeah, there's a young woman named Rachel Foxfeather who's out of Denver, I think, and she does this incredible sound healing, all these
Mm.
instruments, and that seems to be something on the forefront too is frequency. I don't know a whole lot about it. Maybe you can dive a little deeper on frequency and healing and psychedelics.
Yeah, so I mean, again, it's very much the similar premise where you're really kind of lowering the amygdala. So you're in that fight, fight, or freeze response system. So ultimately, what happens is you tense up. So when you're able to put yourself into, let's just say, an alpha, you're able to like rewire for being able to get ready for like war. I actually
Right.
work out. So I work out in the morning with alpha frequency. And then if you want to be in flow state and you want to tap into a theta range that's just above the sleep state, so you're getting that cellular rest because your brain doesn't know. And this is one of the things with the brain. At night when you go to bed, do you choose to dwell on what you didn't get done or do you focus on the things you did? Because your brain doesn't know the difference. You can tell it that it already happened and it will believe because you hear a lot of people talk about manifesting stuff.
Yeah.
Your brain doesn't know if it's already happened or not. We already talked about the subconscious, conscious thoughts. But when you're able to tap into that frequency, you're just able to go just above dream state, into dream state. You're able to go into cellular restoration. So there's a lot of things that you can do with frequency that are actually self healing. It's absolutely the coolest thing ever. And I love a sound bath. Like Sundays are sound bath days. Love those.
What does that look like?
So I have a gym in my house, and I will go out and I will put a sound bath healing on the TV. I will get out my yoga mat, and then I will do a 45-minute sound bath healing, where I have it playing through my surround sound in my house.
It sounds amazing. It's I think it's I really admire the way in which we're moving, where all these things are kind of converging, whether it's psychedelics, breath work, yoga, sound healing. It's amazing to me. I got couple more questions, and then I will. You've been very gracious with your time, Alan. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, what question about your own healing journey that yours? What's a question about your own healing journey that you're still struggling to answer?
Where do I take this new company? So I wrestle with this conversation a lot. So I created Numa. I created the hydration supplement, one because of the critical period, but I'm very fascinated about the genetic side of all of this. And that's where eventually I want to go. So I was working on a tech stack with the same lab that I created Numa with, where we believe that there are 7 different markers that a person has that will tell you which psychedelic therapy is actually better for you or not.
Wow.
And we've created the tech stack. So in 3 to 5 years, we'll get there. So the big question for me right now is how. So I want to go tomorrow because that's my personality.
Right.
But I also know that I'm trying to build a movement. And a lot of what we're going to be doing with Numa, because I believe the integration process is what's really missing. I think that what I keep seeing is that we're talking about how great the trip is, but we're not really talking about the work that's required. So one of the things that I've been working on is just being able to give a morning journal prompt to everybody who buys a container or a unit of hydrate. Every morning you get a journal prompt. If I don't know what to journal, I'll send you one so that you can start the conversations with yourself that I have with myself every day. And I think that's the biggest question. As any new entrepreneur, I've done this once before, a long time ago, built it, and I'm now building something with purpose. And I think there's a lot of questions of what to do first, when to go, where to go, and I want it all done now, but one step at a
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. I was looking at you guys' product in there, and it's an incredible mix of like GABA, taurine, and lots of other things in there. Why did you decide to stack all those things together, and what's the evidence that that works?
So we went and looked at all the science of each of them separately. We looked at cognitive neurotransmission, because
Okay.
ultimately, again, that's what happens with a psychedelic experience is you have this incredible critical period where your brain is now open and you need things that are going to support that. So having inositol and magnesium.
Mm,
As I was working with clinics, we couldn't have caffeine because anybody who's gone through ketamine treatment, some people just don't process caffeine well. So what can we use in this place? So we decided we were going to go to taurine. If you look at a lot of sleep supplements that are out there right now, it's melatonin and L-theanine. So
yeah.
we love the L-theanine because it really does give that relaxation and it targets
Yep.
the alpha brain. So there was a lot of thought that actually went into these ingredients and kind of how they work. I needed vitamin B3, 5, 6, and 12 to break the blood-brain barrier.
Mm,
Because as we said before, there's not a lot of things out there right now that are breaking blood. They're not breaking the brain. So they're
right.
very cellular. As an ultra runner, I can tell you those things are great, but they would never get to your brain. I'm kind of excited that I'm going to be learning how this hydration protocol works when I'm training for another 100, because I decided this
Nice.
year I'm going to run another one. So I'm going to do it on Numa.
It's awesome. It's like you not only are you building something beautiful, but you have tested it on yourself, which I think more people should be doing. Like if you're gonna have something or prescribe something, you should be the person that has done it and done it in a way that's
Shulkin style.
yeah,
Exactly.
totally, totally.
Yes.
Alan, I love the conversation, man. I'm super grateful that we got to spend so much time with you and get to learn about who you are. And you shared so many cool aspects of your life that were personal that I think people will be looking back and can really take from it. And I know you've done on your own podcast and other people's podcasts. I'm grateful for it. But before I let you go, man, what do you got coming up? What are you excited about? And where can people find you?
Yeah, so Numa.health, my blog, all of the podcasts are there. So we have a podcast called Numa, the crossroad of science and enlightenment. The guests that I have on are like you, just super cool, interesting people who just want to make humanity better. Like
Yeah.
it's been awesome. You can find me on Numa, Instagram, Facebook. Numa Health is where we are. I'm actually going to be in Miami at the end of the month at the Betterment Festival. So super excited about that. Just joined an accelerator incubator. So we're going to start working on the genetic test and things that are coming down the pipe. But
Yeah.
so I really appreciate your time. So
Yeah, I'm super excited, man. I can't wait to try out the product, and I can't even wait to see other products that come out of it, man. I think we're in a total, it seems to me that we are in a deficit of nootropics out there. And I think the world is flourishing and just getting ready for it. I think you're put at the perfect spot for it, and I'm grateful for it. Hang on briefly afterwards to
sure.
everybody within the sound of my voice. I hope you have a beautiful day. Reach out to Alan. All the links will be down in the show notes, and have a beautiful day. Aloha.